Code Blue, Trauma Bay 1, now!
Crash cart is here.
Establish an IV line.
I'm drawing up the epi. Defibrillator is ready.
The storm outside Naval Medical Center had knocked out half the city's power, but Trauma Bay 4 was running on backup generators and pure adrenaline. Admiral Richard Voss stood frozen in the doorway of the operating room, still wearing the dress whites he put on for a ceremony that morning, watching a team of doctors fight for the life of his 26-year-old daughter, Emily. 3 hours earlier she had been driving home from her physical therapy clinic when a delivery truck ran a red light and slammed into the driver's side of her car. She had been a Navy corpsman herself once, deployed twice, the kind of woman who patched up wounded Marines under fire without flinching. Now she was the one on the table, and her father, a man who had commanded SEAL teams through the worst missions imaginable, had never felt more powerless in his life. He had seen death before. He had caused it, ordered it, survived it. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of his little girl's blood soaking through white sheets while machines screamed warnings no one seemed able to silence. The lead trauma surgeon, Dr. Marcus Webb, was calling out numbers that kept dropping. Internal bleeding. Collapsed lung. A head injury that had already caused 2 seizures in the ambulance. The Admiral had pulled every string he had to get her transferred here, to the best trauma unit on the East Coast, and now he stood 10 feet away, unable to do a single thing except watch. Nurse Sophia Reyes had been assigned to the case an hour into the fight, called in from a double shift because the unit was short-staffed during the storm. She was not the most senior nurse in the building. She was not the one with the fanciest credentials. But she had a habit that her colleagues sometimes teased her about: she watched patients even after the monitors told her not to. She had learned, years ago in a rural clinic overseas, that machines could be wrong, that vital signs could lie for a few critical minutes, and that the human eye sometimes caught what wires and sensors missed. At 9:47 p.m., the monitor above Emily Voss's bed showed a flatline. The sound that followed, the long, flat, merciless tone, froze everyone in the room. Dr. Webb called the time of death. Nurses began preparing to disconnect the equipment. Admiral Voss made a sound no one in that room would ever forget, a sound that had nothing to do with rank or command, just a father breaking in real time. He staggered forward, gripping the edge of the operating table, and begged them to try again, just one more time, just 30 more seconds. Dr. Webb, a compassionate man who had delivered this kind of news more times than he could count, gently told the Admiral that they had done everything medically possible, that Emily had lost too much blood too quickly, that her heart had simply given out under the trauma. The room began to shift into the quiet, practiced choreography of a hospital processing a death. Someone reached for a clipboard. Someone else began speaking softly about notifying the chaplain. But Sophia Reyes had not moved. She was standing at the foot of the bed, staring at Emily's face, and something about it did not sit right with her. The skin was pale, yes, but not the specific gray-blue pallor she had seen in confirmed deaths before. There was no fixed, dilated stillness in the eyes, because the eyes were closed, but something about the muscles around them seemed wrong, too relaxed, almost peaceful in a way true death rarely looked in trauma victims. She had seen genuine flatlines before, and she had seen them in patients whose bodies had shut down so completely that even a trained nurse's intuition had nothing left to grab onto. This did not feel like that. It was a strange, quiet certainty that crept up her spine, the kind of feeling she had learned, over a decade of nursing, never to dismiss. She stepped closer, ignoring the fact that Dr. Webb was already speaking to the Admiral about arrangements. She lifted Emily's wrist and pressed 2 fingers against the radial pulse point, not because the monitor told her to, but because something inside her refused to accept the silence on that screen as the final word. For 3 full seconds she felt nothing. Her heart sank, and she almost pulled her hand away, almost accepted that grief and hope had tricked her into doubting a room full of trained physicians. And then, faint as a whisper, she felt it. A single, weak pulse. Then nothing. Then, 7 seconds later, another one. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She looked up at the monitor, which was still displaying a flat, unbroken line, and in that instant she understood exactly what was happening. The monitor's lead had likely shifted during the chaos of compressions and the frantic movement of the last hour, disconnecting just enough to lose an accurate reading, while Emily's heart, weakened but not stopped, was still fighting in a rhythm too faint and too slow for the equipment to register properly. She had seen this exact type of equipment failure once before, years ago, in a case that still haunted her, a case where no one had double-checked and a patient had been lost because everyone trusted the machine over their own hands. She was not going to let that happen again. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the somber quiet of the room with a force that made every head turn. "Everyone wait. She's not gone." Dr. Webb turned toward her, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and gentle disbelief, the look of a man who had seen grief make people cling to impossible hope more times than he wished to remember. But Sophia did not back down. She held Emily's wrist up for him to see, positioned his own fingers exactly where hers had been, and told him to wait, just wait, count with her. The room fell into a silence so complete that the storm outside seemed to hold its breath as well. Admiral Voss stood rigid, not daring to hope, not daring not to. 5 seconds passed. Then 8. And then, unmistakably, beneath Dr. Webb's fingers, a pulse. Faint, irregular, but real. His eyes went wide, and he immediately barked orders for the crash cart to be brought back, for the leads to be checked and reattached, for oxygen support to be restored immediately. The room that had been settling into morning erupted instead into a full-scale resuscitation effort, fueled now by a discovery that defied everything the monitor had told them. Admiral Voss dropped to his knees beside the bed, gripping his daughter's hand, whispering her name over and over, while Sophia Reyes stood back just enough to let the team work, her own hands trembling now that the adrenaline of the moment was catching up to her. She had no idea yet how close they still were to losing Emily for good, or what it would take in the next several hours to bring her fully back. All she knew was that for one critical moment, when everyone else in that room had accepted an ending, she had trusted her instincts instead of a machine, and that decision had just changed everything. The next 2 hours in Trauma Bay 4 became a battle unlike anything Admiral Voss had witnessed even in his most harrowing deployments. Dr. Webb and his team worked with a renewed intensity, reattaching leads, adjusting the faulty monitor, and confirming what Sophia had found. Emily's heart had never actually stopped, but had slipped into a dangerously slow and irregular rhythm caused by a combination of blood loss, a bruised heart muscle from the impact, and a brief but severe drop in oxygen to her brain. The false flatline reading, they would later determine, had resulted from a dislodged lead combined with the rhythm being so faint and slow that the monitor's algorithm had misread it as asystole. It was the kind of rare, dangerous coincidence that trauma teams trained for but rarely encountered, and it was precisely the kind of moment where a distracted or less attentive nurse might never have checked. Sophia stayed close throughout the resuscitation, assisting where she could, her mind racing through everything she had learned in her years of service. She thought about the young Marine she had lost in that overseas clinic years ago, the one whose weakened pulse had also been missed because everyone trusted the equipment over their instincts. She had promised herself after that day that she would never again let a monitor make the final decision without a human double-check, and tonight, that promise had just saved a life. As the team stabilized Emily's rhythm and prepared her for emergency surgery to address the internal bleeding and the bruising around her heart, Dr. Webb pulled Sophia aside for a brief moment amid the chaos. He told her, with a raw honesty rare for a surgeon under that kind of pressure, that in 22 years of practicing emergency medicine, he had never seen a nurse question a confirmed flatline with that much conviction, and that her instinct alone was the difference between a funeral and a fighting chance. Admiral Voss, still kneeling by the bed as they prepared to move Emily to the operating room, reached out and gripped Sophia's hand with a strength that surprised her. He did not say much. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes, a man who had commanded elite warriors into the most dangerous corners of the world, was the same look of desperate, grateful humility that any parent would carry in that moment. He simply said thank you, twice, his voice breaking on the second one, and then let the team wheel his daughter away toward surgery. The next 4 hours passed in a kind of agonizing limbo that only hospital waiting rooms can produce. Admiral Voss sat in a hard plastic chair outside the OR, his dress whites now wrinkled and stained, refusing every offer of coffee or food from the staff who recognized him and wanted to help in whatever small way they could. Sophia, technically off duty by this point, found herself unable to leave either. She sat a few chairs down, not because it was her job anymore, but because she needed to see this through, needed to know that the instinct she had trusted with everything had truly been right. When Dr. Webb finally emerged from the operating room, his surgical mask pulled down and exhaustion etched into every line of his face, he was smiling. Emily had made it through surgery. The internal bleeding was controlled, the bruising around her heart was manageable and expected to heal with monitored rest, and while she would need days of careful observation and a long road of physical recovery ahead, she was, against every odd that room had faced 2 hours earlier, alive. Admiral Voss's knees nearly buckled with relief. He thanked every member of the surgical team individually, but when he came to Sophia, he did something no one in that hallway expected. He removed a small pin from the breast of his uniform jacket, an insignia he had worn for over a decade representing his years of command, and pressed it into her palm. He told her that in his career he had awarded medals to some of the bravest men and women in the country, but that none of those medals had ever mattered as much as the courage it took her to speak up in a room full of people ready to accept an ending. Sophia tried to protest, telling him she had simply done her job, but the Admiral shook his head and told her that what she had done went far beyond any job description, that she had trusted her hands and her heart over a machine's cold verdict, and that trust had given him back his daughter. Word of what happened that night spread quickly through the hospital and eventually beyond it, as stories of quiet, unglamorous heroism sometimes do. Sophia never sought the attention, and in interviews afterward she deflected credit toward the entire trauma team, insisting that anyone paying close enough attention would have noticed what she noticed. But those who knew the field understood how rare that kind of vigilance truly was, how many nurses, exhausted and overworked, might have simply trusted the flatline and moved on. Emily Voss spent the following weeks recovering under close medical supervision, with her father rarely leaving the hospital, trading his admiral's schedule for a folding chair beside her bed. When she finally regained full consciousness and understood, in fragments, what had happened to her, she asked to meet the nurse who had refused to give up on her. The two women, one a wounded Navy veteran and one a nurse who had quietly become a kind of hero, sat together in a hospital room weeks later, and Emily thanked her not just for saving her life, but for understanding, in a way few people could, what it meant to fight even when everything said to stop. Admiral Voss would later say in a rare public statement that the greatest lesson of his life, learned not on a battlefield but in a hospital hallway, was that true strength sometimes looks like a single person refusing to look away when everyone else already has. Sophia Reyes returned to her regular shifts not long after, still checking pulses by hand even when the monitors said otherwise, still trusting the instincts that had been sharpened by years of quiet dedication most people would never see. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary courage in the quietest moments, then this channel is for you, because these are exactly the kinds of stories we tell every single week. Hit subscribe now so you never miss the next story of quiet heroism, unexpected miracles, and the people who refuse to give up when everyone else already has, and turn on notifications so you're the first to know when our next powerful story goes live.